In our last interview, we saw that philosophy has a very ambivalent and complicated relationship to mimesis, and that ambivalence goes as far back as the origins of philosophy in Plato's Republic. What we'll see today is that the pre-philosophical origins of mimesis are rooted back in performances and rituals that have the figure of the mimos or the mime as the main protagonist. And therefore they call for an attention to embodied, performative and affective forms of imitation. Anthropology is the discipline that has been attentive to the ritual, performative dimension of mimesis. And today we'll be interviewing one of the main figures in the field of anthropology, specifically historical and cultural anthropology. His name is Christoph Wulf. He is professor of anthropology at the Freie Universität of Berlin. Professor Wulf is the author of a number of books on the subject of performance, ritual, education, the body. He is also the co-author with Günter Gebauer of a monumental study titled Mimesis, Culture, Art, Society, in which he retraces the history of mimesis from its origin in classical antiquity to the present. And today we'll be taking this book as a starting point for our interview to talk about imitation as a human condition. And we have a special guest, Professor Wulf.
Thank you for the invitation. I'm also very happy that we came together as an interdisciplinary group. I was involved for the last 30 years in interdisciplinary work. And so I'm very happy to share also some of the work which we have done or which I have done in this field.
My name is Christoph Wulf. I'm professor for education and anthropology at Freie Universität in Berlin. And I'm also one of the founders of the Interdisciplinary Center of Historical Anthropology at the Freie Universität. And right now I'm also vice president of the German UNESCO Commission. Well, in 1982, we founded a Center of Historical Anthropology in Berlin. And in this context, we worked on, for example, as I said, body. We worked on anthropology of the senses. We worked on the sacred, or we worked on the soul. If you talk psychologists today, they say, "What's that?" We cannot operationalize it. But we were interested in a concept which was central for 2,000 years of European history, the soul. And so we tried to work on some of these topics, and in this context we also discovered the importance of mimesis. There was some influence at the beginning by René Girard, but my concept of mimesis is a little bit broader than his one. His one is very interesting for the explanation of violence, and also this idea that it is a desire, a mimetic desire between human beings, which is important for the development of mimesis, I think is very valuable. But we broadened it much more, and I think we could show, and I could also show this in some ethnographic research, that mimetic phenomena are central in rituals and in the schools and families, and even in peer groups and so on and so on. It was actually the background in which we did research in these years. And in this context, Günter and me discovered the importance of mimesis. And we worked on that actually another 10 years together, and as friends. We are still friends. So it became a central topic of my interest. And in a second phase, we worked on the mimetic condition of the social. And we did another book, which is not translated into English, but it's translated into French. There we worked on the mimetic phenomena in rituals. That was more my field. In gestures, that was also more my field. And in games, that was more Gunther's field. But of course we did that together, but we specialized a little bit. In this context, we were able to show the importance of rituals, because rituals were looked at very critically in Germany due to the fascism, the National Socialism, and that was right. I mean, there is a negative and dangerous side about rituals, and that was very much in the center of the German public, and also of my own, because it was the '68 generation who fought rituals. But what we didn't see is how essential rituals are, in spite of the points where you have to be careful and which you might have to criticize. They are still so constitutive, and it is, so we worked on this, and with this 12-year study, could show how central they are in education and family, media, peer group, and also, of course, in the school, which is a very ritualized institution. And by doing that, I think we developed a more complex understanding of rituals and the mimetic processes involved, and could show that they are essential, and you cannot imagine a society without rituals. But of course, you have also to have a critical view on these things, because they might be used to suppress people. So that was the second point. We did 3 books together, and we are still, working together, not that intensively as we did during these 10 years when we wrote these 3 books, but still we are close. The cultural learning is to a large extent mimetic learning. To a very large extent. So we learn, for example, even the upright position in mimetic processes, and we know from reports of in India that children who were brought up by animals, by monkeys, do not walk in the upright position. They use their hands also. And there are other examples for it. So even this basic natural kind of characteristic, the upright position, is also learned culturally. Second point, language is learned mimetically. No doubt, I just give it as an example. Third one, even emotions. These are just 3 examples where it's very obvious that the mimetic processes play an important role. We need mimetic processes to create family life, to create the community in the family. And mimetic processes does not mean repetition like a photocopy machine. It means recreation. Recreation by referring ourselves on an earlier model. But basically there are 2 aspects in it. There is one diachronic aspect, that it means the relationship to the festival last year, and there's also a synchronic aspect, that means the relationship within the ritual. Rituals only function if the mimetic process between the people functions. Then you have that kind of flow experience, which is so important for the success of rituals and also for the success of much of the mimetic process. For example, I have a grandchild now, which had almost 3 years, and there I saw how important these mimetic processes are. I knew about it, but when you see it and experience it with your granddaughter, then it is still another experience. So when she started to discover that there are things outside of herself, she went there and said, look. And it has 2 functions. One is that she discovered the world of objects, not her, but the object, and she wanted another human being to be present in this process.
So it's the cooperation of social and object, which is essential for the learning. And I could go on for hours.
Well, but that is another very important point you are mentioning, the relationship between aesthetics and humanities, or science.
Right.
You know, science is always a difficult word, because in the German context we have the concept of Geisteswissenschaft. So we accept that humanities are science, are scientific. They have different rules and different norms and different ways of being scientific, but they are scientific. In the English context, this is sometimes a little bit difficult to communicate, but we insist very much on that. The equivalence and the equal value of research in humanities. And in these interdisciplinary contexts, especially with scientists, and this is sometimes something you have to discuss and to argue, and then you usually get an agreement, but that does not actually go that far that the politics agree on it, or that the public always agrees on it. They might still have some problems, although in the German context I would say it's accepted that the humanities are essential for the society. And also if you look at the funds given to the humanities, this is not too bad. It's a quarter of what is spent for research is given to the humanities and social sciences. So we should not complain. And because we are, also on the basis of the Second World War, the fascism, and all these negative experiences, we know how important it is to make people understand their own situation, their own difficulties, where they are racist, and so on and so on. So this is not a minor task of research or of scientific research. It's as important as research in other fields, of technology or so.
I was wondering if I should not give you in 10 minutes an idea about the context in which I developed this notion of mimesis, and that's anthropology. When you say anthropology in English, people think of ethnology, cultural anthropology, ethnology. In my view, this is just one paradigm of anthropology. What is anthropology? In my view, it is the question, who are we as human beings at the beginning of the 21st century? Who are we? Who do we understand ourselves? And that this is important is very obvious. And my thesis is, also in this book, which has been mentioned, that actually there are two tendencies in the globalized world. One is towards the universal, towards homogenization. The accent is put on what we have in common. This is one paradigm. I'm now talking about 4 paradigms. One paradigm is related to the homogenization. That means we are all Homo sapiens sapiens, and as such, we have certain things in common. That's one paradigm. The other paradigm, which is interested more in the universal, is one of the philosophical anthropology. Gehlen, Scheler, Plessner are the names. That is developed in the first part of the 20th century in Germany. And there the idea is also, I'm not going into details, but just give you a little bit about the context in which I work or we work. And in this paradigm, the basic idea is, what is the difference between human beings and animals? Today, our interest is more, what do we have in common with animals? Then what is the difference? But still, this was used, the animals were used, certain concepts of animals were used to find out what is specific about the human being as Homo sapiens sapiens. And then we have another big tendency in the globalized world, which stresses the particular. And for this, I think there are also 2 paradigms important. One is the historical anthropology. That is what has been developed in the École des Annales in France. That the interest is in a diachronic view understanding who we are today by comparing us with historical situations and historical epochs. The other one is the ethnology, the cultural anthropology, and that is also interested in the particular. That is basically the question, who are people from other cultures? And today, that is what ethnology takes care of. And these two are interested in the particular character, in the, you can say, the unique character of each culture, whereas the other two paradigms are interested in the general, the overall of human beings. Now, my view, these four paradigms, two paradigms dealing with the universal, with what we have in common, harmonization and philosophical anthropology, two other paradigms dealing with the particular historical anthropology, diachronic and synchronic ethnology. And in this context, we worked also on mimesis. I got also very interested in art long time. Once, when I was young, I wanted to become a painter instead of. So this kind of interest for mainly for the for arts also made me think a lot about the process of aesthetic experience. And in my view, this is very much a mimetic process. I can talk about that later. You know, that you, for example, you get hold of this Christ statue only by reshaping it, recreating it with your views, taking it into your imaginary, and not by just only talking about it and saying to what period it belongs and so on. This is one approach. The other one is really that you stay with the art, and through reshaping it in your imaginary, you get hold of it and you internalize it. And we can talk about that later on.
I want to explain the importance of mimesis by using an example. An example of a transcultural cooperation between a Japanese team in Kyoto and a German team in Berlin. So the topic of that case study is family happiness. What does a family do to make its member happy or at least content? We went to 3 families and we asked ourselves, what is a family festival? A family festival which is somehow related to the well-being of a family. And we said in our culture, it's Christmas. And then we thought, what could that be in Japan? And we came up with the New Year festival. And now I want to make clear how important mimetic processes are to create that kind of well-being of a family. And I came up with 5 transcultural dimensions. I'm not going to describe you the ethnographic process. We have published that in German and in Japanese and in a very detailed way. I just want to come up with these 5 transcultural insights which might serve as a model for transcultural research, which is one of the challenges of our time, I guess. So the first dimension was religious practice. You have religious practices in Germany at Christmas, and you have them in Japan at the moment of the New Year. In Germany, this family we went to, they changed their house. They had put on all kinds of symbols of the Christmas period, and they had music which is related to Christmas. And so they created already another atmosphere in their living room. It became a room where they wanted to celebrate something. On that basis, it was obvious that the family members expected that something was going to happen which was different from the daily life. And that is, of course, the Christmas ceremony. And for this family also went to the church. That was one element in it. And the point is that the family happiness is related to something what you might call transcendental. It's not just established in the reality, but there's some idealism in it. We want to also to make our family part of a community which has more to give and to than just the practical life. And then when they came back, they continued. They had their own way of reading the central parts of the Lucas Evangelium, and they did that, and then they had another second way of doing it where they used the Berlin dialect, that they adapted the message in another language, and that was a mimetic act. That is a recreation in a certain way. Of course, they had that model of the Bible, but still it was different. Then they were singing Christmas songs, create a special situation. And that was one which you could tell is related to a transcendental situation, which we celebrate at Christmas. And for example, in Japan, this was similar. You know, the family went to the Shinto shrine, they went to the Buddhist temple, and they did that both. And they went to both institutions. And the day before, they even went to the family tomb and celebrated their relationship to the history of their own family. And that was very important for the atmosphere in which they celebrated their New Year, knowing that you owe something to your parents, your grandparents, and so on. That was an historical perspective, which we didn't find in the German family in that way, but they both related their action at Christmas and at the New Year festival to another institution, to a higher institution, to a higher importance. That was one point, and that was also similar in both cultures. I mean, the celebration themselves were very different, but you had that idea that family well-being has something to do with the transcendence in both cultures, in both families at least. So that is one aspect. The other important transcultural aspect for well-being of families is food. You know, in Germany, this is not that complicated, but all families have their traditional Christmas food. There are some who eat fish, there are others who eat ducks, there are others who just eat sausage, but they repeat that. Every year they prepare the food in the same way. Of course, repetition means that it is not the same. It's every year a new creation. But there is a mimetic relationship to the year before. But still, it is something new. So it's a combination of tradition and a mimetic recreation of the tradition. And that is what you might call one characteristic of the Japanese family. Was much more traditional. They have special food which they eat only at that festival. For example, long noodles, which represent eternal life. And they had all kinds of fruits and symbols in the food, made out of food, which had two functions. One, to thank for the last year, for the well-being the last year, and on the second to express the hope that the next year will be as good as the last one. So this is a very elaborated type of cooking. You know, women traditionally spend a whole night in preparing this food, and then there was an interesting aspect in it. The women said, well, you know, when I got married, I tried to meet the taste of my husband's family. And I was exercising it. And that is an interesting idea. They said the idea is that through taste, through eating the same, through eating it in the same style, in the same way of preparation, there is something common which you prepare for the family. And all members who eat the same food and in the same way of preparing it, have that experience, that it is something which unites them, because that is the taste, the family taste. And obviously, this was a knowledge in Japanese families that this is important. That it was traditionally the woman who took care of it is another issue, the gender issue, but that's not our topic. But it was their contribution to create this kind of unity through the creation of a similar taste in food. And also the fact that they were sitting together and eating is, of course, creating a community. It's a ritual, but the mimetic process are extremely important. The mimetic process in terms of food, that they pass the food from one to the other person, or also on the fact that the food is always the same, related, in comparison with the food last year, and it will be the same also in comparison with the food next year. But there's, of course, a big difference. The German family was sitting around a table, and each member had a certain chair and was sitting on that chair. That was very different in Japan. People were sitting on the floor with a little table also, but there was not an individual kind of space. It was a common space, and they were sitting and moving around. And it seems to me that this is a very important difference also in the mimetic learning. In one case, you learn that you have your place and you are an individual, and in the other case, you learn much more that you are part of a community, of the family community. Anyway, so this is the second point, having food together as a mimetic process in which the family constitutes itself, the repetition of a festival food every year. The third element, which is important, is the exchange of gift. This is a mimetic process in itself. A well-known model of exchanging gift is that you give something, the other one has to accept it, and then you expect that some time later you get something back from the other person. And now it gets interesting. Let's say the art of giving presents, giving gifts, is that you change that. I mean, if I gave you a book and you give me a book at another occasion, this is not very imaginative. It is much better when the mimetic process is more complex. It does not represent just the thing you got, but is something else. I did some work on this, showing how people learn the ability to give gifts, and how they learn it in mimetic processes, and how the variety of possibilities is implicit. And that is a good example for the fact that mimesis is not just making a copy. It's a creative act, a creative recreation of the fact that you got something from somebody and you give it something back. And in the case of Christmas, it's very interesting. I mean, basically also God who gave his son as a present, and then, of course, the big gift industry which developed with all the ambivalence involved, the capitalistic elements. But this is one aspect. But there are other aspects. For example, in this family we went to, they were sitting together in the moment where they shared the gift. It was like a family body. And what happened is that they used the gift in order to establish some kind of a mimetic community in exchanging views, interpretations, and so on. In Japan, the moment of gift is not as that important. There it is related to the fact that parents give some money or some little stuff to the children. It's less in that model where also children give gifts to their parents. But anyway, it's also a very strong element where mimetic elements play an important role. And the next element is the narration, the family narration. That is also a mimetic phenomenon. Each family has certain stories which are told at every family festival. So what the grandmother did when she was a child, or what your father did when he was 5 years old, how stupid he was and how lovely he was at the same time. And this kind of repeating family stories is an important contribution to create the identity of a family. These are just the 4 elements. You could probably find other ones. I tried them out, at least by talking with Chinese scholars and also talking with Iran scholars. They have the Spring Festival, and it's very obvious that these elements also appear in other cultures. Transcultural elements with strong mimetic aspects which contribute to the well-being of a family. This, of course, does not imply that at Christmas or at the New Year celebration in Japan there cannot be big conflicts. We all know this, that often the spare time we have in families help to bring out conflicts, and sometimes they are very difficult and very, very strong and are actually operating against the basic idea of Christmas. So this is, of course, not excluded, and this is also part of the reality. That means that the well-being in family and also the attempts of creating well-being in mimetic processes can also be without success. So maybe this just as a case study where mimetic processes are of central importance. Well, it seems to me that the importance of disciplines is related to the 19th century, 18th century. That was very important. We developed different disciplines, and in these disciplines we developed a huge body of knowledge. It seems to me that in the 20th century it is much more interesting to look at the phenomena from different disciplinary perspectives. For example, if you take something like the body, there is no discipline on the body. There are dozens of disciplines relating to the body. Or if you take the senses, there are so many different aspects. Or if you take the mimetic phenomena, these are the complex human phenomena cannot be understood by one discipline. You need a multidisciplinary or transdisciplinary approach. And that's what we focused on since the 80s of the last century. And that was one of our major ideas, and we pushed that in the science of culture and the humanities, and also even in our disciplines. We pushed it in transdisciplinary perspective as a necessary one. So I would argue that what the discipline was for the 18th and 19th century, the transdisciplinary perspective and transdisciplinary cooperation is for the second part of the 20th century and the 21st century. And then later on I was also a PI in a Center of Excellence where we cooperated with medicine, with brain studies. The topic was languages of emotion. So we said emotion we can only get hold of when in a really transdisciplinary research. That's extremely difficult, the cooperation with natural scientists, because they have a different language, different way of thinking. For example, it took quite some time until our colleagues and friends in the brain, from the brain research department understood that they didn't know everything. They had that attitude, oh, now we know what emotions are. No. And after a year or two, they discovered that they knew very little about the complexity of emotion, as we discovered also that there were dimensions we had never thought of and which are essential for the understanding of emotions. So this interdisciplinary, transdisciplinary research, I think, opens new perspectives. Also between the different disciplines, there are new questions coming up. There are new perspectives that developed. That's why I myself committed myself very much to transdisciplinary, and there's another aspect, transnational, transcultural research. This is very interesting. The world is so different, even in English and French and German. These are three languages I'm quite familiar with. But if you take even other languages like Japanese, the perception is already different. I can give you a little example from the study on the well-being of families. We were looking at a certain situation in the family, and I thought that was great. These family members, they were sitting closely together, they touched each other, they talked with each other. It was lively, it was a flow of emotions, it was wonderful, in my view. My Japanese colleague said, well, you German, you are very talkative. And that's, if you take the Japanese way of being in the world, this is very true. The Japanese talk much less than we do, and much less than Latin Americans do, and they talk in a different way. They also handle conflicts differently. I mean, in Germany, when you have a conflict with your wife, you talk about it, you think you have to bring up the points. The Japanese have more a tendency, I'm simplifying a little bit. The woman goes into one corner, the man in the other corner, and next morning the conflict is no longer as important. This is, of course, a simplification, I'm aware of it, but it makes clear that there is a cultural difference in the way we perceive the world, not only in the way we do research on the world. It's already in the perception different, and that has to do with the language, but it has also to do with mimetic phenomena, which are different. Culture is learned differently, and my basic thesis is that cultural learning is largely mimetic learning. Well, that's not easy to answer. At a given moment, people thought that they could identify mirror neurons. This perspective had been given up. We talk now in this context on system. That means that we do not know exactly how it works. They just know what we already know since Aristotle and even before, that there are mimetic phenomena, and they are also able to describe it. So I appreciate this research, but I'm aware of the fact that it is also limited, and that its value for explaining social phenomena is limited. I once was in the United States invited for a conference on mimetic phenomena, and we had Jacoboni, who presented the mirror neuron research, and me, who presented the historical humanistic approach. And it was very obvious that the complexity is more with us, and that we can share lots of insights and can also support what the neuroscience people think, and they can support things which we have elaborated. But it is not so that they know something which we do not know at all. They know a little bit the physical basement of processes, which is important. I'm aware of it. So I'm in favor, as you see, of cooperation and trying to come to know together more of these phenomena. But the insight that mimetic phenomena are central to the development of the human being is very old. And Aristotle said that the human being is the most mimetic being in the world. And that is true. I have a grandchild, now almost 3 years, and I can see, or have seen in the last 3 years, how she becomes a human being through mimetic processes, in terms of language, in terms of behavior, in terms of emotions even. It starts with the upright position, which you learn also mimetically, and it goes on with language and with emotions and with social behavior. And it's fascinating. But the importance is that this is a cultural activity of many, many people. And in that context, I got aware of the fact how important heritage is. Of course, heritage has to be developed, has to be changed, has to be adapted. But we are all zwergs on the shoulder of the giant of humanity. And this, I think, we have to be aware of, and that includes, of course, also a historical consciousness and a cultural consciousness. We are not master of our own destiny. And you know, the discourse on Anthropocene, in which I'm right now involved, my last book is on that, I think makes it very clear that how important heritage is and how important it is to find a way of coping with the negative developments of human action.